When it comes to our kids, some of the biggest questions I find myself asking are what leads to them not feeling good about themselves, anxiety, depression, things like that. These big questions can lead me to dark places. But today in the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Face in the Dark, Dr. Kathy is going to look at some of these topics and give us some insight based on some new research, some interesting thoughts, and Dr. Kathy's book, 5 to Thrive. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Koch.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, a long-term decline in unsupervised activity may be contributing to mental health declines in children and adolescents. That's coming from a new report by Peter Gray, who's a researcher at Boston College. He said in a recent Scientific American review, quote, "It's overwhelming evidence that if you take away children's opportunities for independent activity, they're not going to learn how to be independent. And that's going to lead them to be anxious and depressed, fearful about the future, and all the things that we're seeing now," end quote. The piece outlines that mental health among adolescents has decreased steadily since 2010, with death by suicide the leading cause of death for those 10 to 24 in 2019. Gray and his team cite the work of psychologist Jean Twenge, who has observed a dramatic increase in anxiety and depression from the 1960s through the 90s. During the same time frame, Twenge also reports a steep decline in the internal locus of control. Control is also central to established research called self-determination theory. This research shows that kids and adults have 3 basic psychological needs. If they're not fulfilled, kids aren't happy. The first of those is autonomy, the sense that we have some freedom to choose what we're going to do, that we're in charge of our own life. The second is a need for competence. Not only am I free to choose what I want to do, but I can do it. And the third is relatedness. It's also important that I have the people on my side. Connection with peers, by this theory, is an extremely important contributor to the sense of well-being. So, Dr. Kathy, if you want to make kind of a parent concerned, I think you start talking about depression, right? I mean, that's what drew me into this article. What do you make of this? Is the decrease in unsupervised play really a lead indicator in depression? Or is it kind of a lag indicator, meaning that it really unsupervised play brings some of the qualities that support kids to avoid or withstand anxiety?
I wonder if it could be both. I certainly agree, and I wasn't surprised as you began to share this with us, that kids need independence. They need to learn how to be independent. They need experiences making decisions and finding out that they were wise enough to make good decisions. They have to learn what happens if they make a bad decision, and do they stand back up and walk out of that valley experience. So without the opportunity to learn those things, they will always be dependent, and they'll be, hanging out in mommy's, apron strings, if you will. That's what the saying would have been when I was a young girl. Oh my goodness, I just aged myself. Aprons, what are those? Oh my goodness. But yeah, it's, yes, unsupervised play, creativity, experimentation, discovery. It's so valuable. And too many of our kids are sitting at desks and turn the page, here's another book. And they're told what to believe. They're not given opportunities to figure it out on their own. Those are all related to what I think you're talking about.
I'll be honest, Dr. Kathy, I don't know that I have a great creative muscle anymore, right? I just feel like so many things have been fed to me, even as a parent, right? That, whether it's screens or the idea that I should be more efficient, or, now I have a robot that mows my lawn. Well, I don't have that, but I know people that do, right? And there's this reality that I feel like I've kind of been pulled out of the world, and in some of that have lost my understanding of what it takes to be creative. What would you say to parents who want to encourage or teach their kids how to be creative when we might not even have the muscles ourselves?
Then we do it as a family, right? We turn off the TV on a Saturday morning and we get out the anything goes craft bucket, and we say, in 20 minutes, make something that demonstrates gravity. As an example, that would be, interesting to do. Or if your children know the 8 smarts, you could say, take 30 minutes and convince me that your favorite smart is more important than the others. Create something that convinces us of that. And so you keep scrap paper and pieces of felt and pipe cleaners and glue and double sticky tape, and all those kinds of things. And you have them in a box and you bring them out and everybody goes along with it. That would be the ideal thing. And then you talk about the joy of creativity and the joy of spontaneity and the joy of discovery and the fact that we don't have to red pen it. We can simply enjoy it.
What do you make of the research for control that they're talking about here, that Twenge and others are kind of highlighting? Is self-determination really that important? And how should parents kind of foster that?
It's interesting because in the technology book that I wrote, the third lie that I believe technology teaches all of us, especially our young people, is that we must have choice. Because we look at all of the apps on our phone and all of the possibilities, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is theory that kids are being taught choices that are right. Those of us who are older know that choice is a privilege. So it is significant that they learn to make, again, choices that line up with their values. Do they even know what their values are? Do they know what they're good at? And can they make choices that line up with that? Do they know who they want to become? And can they make choices that line up with that? So the desire for control, the desire for that kind of autonomy, again, where they get to determine some things on their own, totally legit. And I think one of the things we better do, if we're right, that control and self-determination are important, we better teach kids decision-making. We better teach kids why this is better than that. Wayne, one of the easiest ways to do that is just three standards, good, better, and best. What would be a good decision or a good next step? What would be better and what would be best? We can start to teach those things to our kids so that they're not satisfied and they know to move on beyond what seemed to be so easy for them.
Dr. Kathy, inside of this, you give kind of a lot of insight into how we can drive kids to thrive. And and Gray talks about this idea of teaching kids kind of to be happy, that we give them kind of a call to well-being, right? With autonomy and competence and relatedness. Can you outline the 5 ideas of thriving that you kind of outline in your book, 5 to Thrive? And why should those be developed in kids?
Yeah, I love that. So we have competence in common. It was the second need mentioned here. It's the 5th one for me because I believe that you can't have competence if you don't have the first 4. They have relatedness as the last one on their list. That's the middle of my model. Belonging is what I call it. Being able to connect and relate is obviously a great word. Autonomy, I would put that as a part of security. Do I know myself well enough and the people around me well enough that I know who to trust and who not to trust, which gives me freedom. If I have no security, I will not be free. And they're talking here about the benefit of freedom, which is so very true. So the model that we teach at our ministry, Celebrate Kids, would be security, who can I trust, leads to identity, who am I? And I often say that we have an identity crisis in our culture because we have a security crisis. We have people trusting things and not people. We have people who are acting like they're not trustworthy. They have no integrity. They have no diligence. They're not resilient. They're not telling the truth, etc. So security leads to identity, which leads to belonging. So this relatedness that they talk about, if I know who I am and I know who I can trust, I will have a much healthier belonging or relatedness. And then that leads to purpose. They left this one out. Purpose is huge. Why am I alive? A lack of purpose is the number one cause of suicide today. If you look at suicide notes and research that's been done. So purpose, and if you have belonging or relatedness, you're going to find purpose in those connections. And then competence, what do I do well? Not what do I do perfectly, but what do I do well, which comes out of my purpose. So if you're lacking competence, get in touch with purpose. If you're lacking purpose, look around to see who you could serve. If you don't know who to belong to, ask yourself, who are you and how are you representing yourself to others? If you don't have any good identity, ask yourself what your security is. And again, if you're lacking that, it explains why all of it is just going to tumble down.
As Dr. Kathy was talking today, I was reminded of a passage that comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 11, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 16. Be careful, or you will be enticed to turn away and worship other gods and bow down to them. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that it will not rain, and the ground will yield no produce. And you will soon perish from the good land the Lord is giving you. Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the door frames of your homes and on your gates so that your days and the days of your children may be many. In the land the Lord has swore to give your ancestors, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. This passage was written to a group of people in a specific time, in a specific part of the world, and they were going through a specific thing that God was giving them encouragement for. I think these words, though, at the same time, are an encouragement for us. That in moments where it seems natural for us maybe to step back or maybe disengage, that God's calling us to really be active, to engage, to participate in the nature that He has created, to exercise our minds, to think through the different realities that He has put in place and in motion, and to have structures that remind us of who He is and how He calls us, the identity, those 5 to Thrive principles that Dr. Kathy gives. I think practicing that with our kids, going into nature and spending time being creative with our families and engaging different thought practices to help us reorient our minds around what God is doing. Doing that with our kids can be an incredible light that shines and cuts through dark times of anxiety and depression. And I think that's really what kids today, and even more, the society today, needs adults and people who love to celebrate kids, to step in and do and lead well. So be encouraged. Do that in your community. Do that with the kids that are around you, that you love, that you care about, and glorify God in those moments. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this, our daily segment, Face in the Dark. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Koch, my name's Wayne Stender, and I want to say thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.